Welcome back, CMA candidates, to another explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because honestly, we're tackling one of the most critical topics you're going to face on the exam and, well, in your future careers too. Think of today's session as a minimalist whiteboard masterclass. We're going to pivot away from just crunching numbers and labeling variances. Instead, we're going to grab our magnifying glasses and actively investigate them. I know you're all working so hard, and my goal is to make sure you have the absolute best tools to understand this material inside and out. So grab your notebooks, get comfortable, and let's get ready to think like true analysts. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look beyond the basic calculations. Then, we'll explore the interdependence of variances. Next up, investigating the source, determining which ones are actually significant. And finally, closing that feedback loop.
All right, starting us off with Section 1, Beyond the Calculation, Finding the Why. Now, I know you already know how to calculate price and efficiency variances, right? You just slap an F for favorable or a U for unfavorable next to your final answer and call it a day. But listen, on the CMA exam, just being a human calculator, that's not enough. The real undeniable value of a certified management accountant lies in root cause analysis. The very moment you see a variance, you have to ask yourself, why did this actually happen? Is it just some random number on a spreadsheet? Or is it a symptom of a much deeper issue hiding in the purchasing department or out on the production line? Today, we're moving from how much the variance is to figuring out exactly why it exists.
Moving right along to Section 2, the interdependence of variances. So one of the absolutely most important concepts you've got to grasp for the exam is that variances do not exist in a vacuum. They are deeply, deeply connected. A favorable variance in one single department can literally trigger an avalanche of unfavorable variances in another. Let me tell you a classic cause and effect story that examiners just love to test. Imagine your purchasing manager decides to save the company some cash by buying cheap, low-grade raw materials. On paper, step 1 looks like a massive win, right? They've generated a favorable direct materials price variance. They might even be expecting a bonus. But then look at step 2. Because those materials are such poor quality, they're constantly snapping, jamming, and breaking on the production line. That perceived win in purchasing just created total chaos on the factory floor. And step 3 is the inevitable result: sky-high waste and massive machine downtime. Suddenly you're hit with severe unfavorable materials usage variances and unfavorable labor efficiency variances. So the crucial takeaway here is this: you have to look at the net effect. As a CMA, it's your job to evaluate the overall financial impact. You simply cannot celebrate an isolated favorable variance in purchasing if those so-called savings are instantly eaten up by wasted materials and tons of extra overtime labor. At the end of the day, that cheap material was actually a terrible financial decision.
Which brings us to Section 3, investigating the source, or figuring out who is exactly responsible. Once we actually recognize a variance, we have to trace the problem all the way back to the specific department that caused it. We need to know who's responsible. And this brings us to a highly testable exam term: responsibility accounting. This is simply the practice of investigating variances directly at their source department. Think of it as the framework we use to hold specific managers accountable for the costs and operations that they actually control. Let's map out our usual suspects together, kind of like detectives. First up, direct materials price variance. The responsible department here is usually purchasing. Potential causes? Well, maybe they failed to take a trade discount, or maybe the global market price of oil just randomly spiked. Next, direct materials usage variance. This one typically falls on the production supervisor. Did they provide poor training to the workers? Or maybe it was those low-quality materials we just talked about. Then we have direct labor rate variance, which is often tied to HR or production. A really common cause here is using highly skilled, super expensive workers to do a very simple task, just because the junior staff called in sick. And finally, direct labor efficiency variance. This is usually on production. Are the machines outdated? Is the workflow poorly designed, causing bottlenecks? Seeing these logical connections is absolutely key to passing. Now, I want to give you a very direct exam tip. And honestly, this is just a great rule for managing people in the real world too. If a variance is caused by uncontrollable external factors, we're talking a national strike, a natural disaster, or a global pandemic, do not penalize the manager. As CMAs, we absolutely still analyze that variance to understand our financial position, but we don't hold the department manager personally responsible for an act of nature. It's just out of their hands.
All right, Section 4, Determining Significance, Knowing Exactly When to Act.
So we know how to find the variance and we know who to talk to. But when do we actually pull the trigger and take action? In the real world, a CMA just cannot spend their time investigating every single penny that falls out of line. You never sleep. We have to prioritize our investigations. And to do this, we use a brilliant concept called management by exception. This is the practice of focusing management's attention only on significant deviations from expected outcomes. It's a lifesaver because it saves incredible amounts of time and resources by simply ignoring all that normal statistical noise. We generally look for two primary triggers to launch a full investigation: size and trend. First, size. Basically, is the variance large enough to even matter? For example, is it greater than 5% of our total budget? A massive one-time variance absolutely demands immediate attention. Second, we look at the trend. Is this a random walk, meaning it's favorable one month, unfavorable the next, just kind of bouncing around? Or is it consistently getting worse? A continuous downward trend is a massive red flag that you need to dig into, even if the individual monthly variances seem pretty small. To make this concrete, we often visualize this data using a statistical control chart. Notice those two horizontal dashed lines. You've got your upper control limit and your lower control limit. As long as our actual costs, represented by that jagged line bouncing around in the middle, stay within those boundaries, we consider it normal statistical fluctuation. We don't stress over it. But the exact moment that line breaks above the upper limit or drops below the lower limit, the process is considered out of control. And that is when management by exception triggers a full-blown investigation. And finally, Section 5, closing the feedback loop. Listen, our investigation isn't just about pointing fingers and assigning blame. That is not what good leadership is about. It's about fixing the business for the next cycle so we continually improve. Depending on what we find, management generally reacts in two main ways, based on whether the root cause can actually be fixed. If the variance is persistent and uncontrollable, say the cost of raw materials has permanently increased across the entire global market, well, then we need to update our standard costs. Our old budget is simply no longer realistic. However, if the variance is controllable, we take direct action. We implement better training for our assembly workers, or we fire that terrible supplier and go find better vendors.
When you're sitting in that exam room, feeling the pressure, I want you to remember this ultimate mantra for finding the root cause. Just ask yourself, did a decision elsewhere cause this? Don't just stop at the very first department you see in the word problem. Look deeper at the entire operational chain. And that actually leads perfectly into my absolute favorite quick study tip. If an exam question tells you that the materials price variance is highly favorable, but the labor efficiency variance is highly unfavorable, the culprit is almost always purchasing. Remember our story from earlier? Cheap materials lead to slow, wasteful work. Recognizing how interconnected these concepts are is literally your golden ticket to passing.
You are all doing such fantastic work today. Keep analyzing the data, keep questioning the why behind the numbers, and keep pushing forward. Which leaves me with one final question to challenge you. Are you ready to walk through a complex scenario involving multiple interdependent variances? I highly encourage you to go tackle a practice problem right now while this is all completely fresh in your mind. Keep up the great work, and I will see you in the next explainer.